What happens when two powerhouse hosts collide on live television over a topic that cuts too close to the bone? The air in the studio was heavy, almost electric, as Jeannie Mai sat across from Sherri Shepherd. Cameras were rolling. The audience was alive with anticipation. What began as a warm and cheerful reunion quickly unraveled into one of the most uncomfortable, unforgettable moments in daytime TV history. But before we get into every intense detail of what actually went down, make sure to hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below telling me whose side you're on, because trust me, by the end of this story, you'll definitely have an opinion. The interview began just like any other. Sherri welcomed Jeannie onto the stage with genuine warmth, both women hugging as the audience applauded loudly. They'd known each other for years. Two successful, outspoken women who had navigated the highs and lows of fame, heartbreak, and public scrutiny. Their friendship had survived scandals, personal losses, and plenty of media noise. On the surface, it looked unshakable. Sherri started off lighthearted, asking Jeannie about her current projects, her fashion ventures, and life as a mom. Jeannie answered enthusiastically, her trademark energy filling the room as she spoke with animation, laughing, gesturing with her hands, keeping everyone entertained. The crowd was fully engaged, hanging on every word. But then something shifted. Sherri's tone changed, more serious, more deliberate. She leaned forward in her seat, her expression soft but laced with something deeper. She brought up Jeannie's recent podcast comments about forgiveness, healing, and moving on after divorce. The moment she said it, the mood in the room changed. Everyone knew this topic was loaded. Jeannie's divorce had been public and messy. Headlines, rumors, social media speculation. It had all played out under a harsh spotlight. Sherri asked Jeannie to expand on what she meant when she said some people use forgiveness as a weapon to dodge accountability. Jeannie's smile faltered slightly. She paused, taking a deep breath before answering carefully. She said that in her experience, some people demand forgiveness without truly understanding or acknowledging the harm they've caused. They want to move on without doing the emotional work that healing requires. She talked about how people sometimes manipulate narratives, casting themselves as the victim when they were actually the ones who created the pain in the first place. The room grew quiet. You could feel everyone leaning in, realizing this conversation was no longer about celebrity gossip. It was personal and raw. Sherri nodded, but her expression showed hesitation, maybe even discomfort. Her next comment carried a defensive edge. She said that for her, forgiveness wasn't about whether someone deserved it. It was about freeing herself from resentment. She explained that she forgave her ex-husband not for him, but for her own peace. Holding on to anger, she said, was like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. Jeannie's expression tightened. Her response came measured but sharp. She said she wasn't talking about holding grudges. She was talking about people who weaponize forgiveness to manipulate others into accepting poor treatment. She said sometimes forgiveness is just a fancy way of avoiding hard truths. Her voice grew firmer, filled with conviction. Not everyone who asks for forgiveness has earned it, she said, and boundaries are just as vital as grace. The audience stirred, unsure whether to clap or stay silent. A few people clapped softly. Sherri crossed her arms, her body language turning guarded. She said that it sounded like Jeannie was still holding on to pain, that she was allowing her ex to have control over her emotions. Maybe, Sherri suggested, Jeannie still had work to do on herself before she could truly move forward. That comment landed like a slap. Jeannie's eyes widened, then she laughed. But it wasn't a joyful laugh. It was the kind of laugh you let out when you're caught off guard by something hurtful. She said it was interesting how quickly Sherri turned the conversation into a critique of her healing. How Sherri assumed she knew what Jeannie's journey looked like behind closed doors. Jeannie pointed out that Sherri had her own public struggles, her own heartbreaks. Why was it acceptable for Sherri to process her pain one way, but not for Jeannie to do it differently? Sherri leaned in again, her voice rising slightly. She insisted she wasn't attacking Jeannie, but trying to help. She said Jeannie was stuck, so focused on being right, on being the wronged one, that she couldn't see how her own choices played a part in what happened. Sherri said as a friend she had to speak honestly even if it stung. The audience gasped. The tension was now undeniable. Jeannie straightened in her chair, her tone defensive but controlled. She said Sherri had no right to make assumptions about her marriage or her healing process. Just because Sherri had chosen to forgive didn't mean that was the correct path for everyone. Taking the high road, Jeannie said, sometimes just meant accepting less than you deserve. It meant letting people avoid accountability under the banner of peace. She said she was done with that. Done with pretending everything was okay just to make others comfortable. Sherri's frustration was visible now. She said Jeannie was making it about gender, when really it was about emotional growth. She said playing the victim might win sympathy online, but it wouldn't bring true peace. She said that real healing meant taking responsibility for your life, your choices, and your happiness. She said what Jeannie was doing wasn't empowerment. It was anger dressed up as strength. Jeannie's hands trembled slightly, but her voice didn't waver. She said Sherri calling her anger performative was the exact kind of dismissal women hear when they speak their truth. She said she had every right to be angry, and that anger didn't mean she was unhealed. Maybe, she added, Sherri was uncomfortable with anger because she never allowed herself to feel hers. Maybe forgiveness had become Sherri's shield against pain. Sherri's eyes widened, clearly hurt. She said Jeannie was crossing a line, making things personal. She reminded her that she had invited Jeannie as a friend to celebrate her, not to be attacked. Sherri said she didn't appreciate being psychoanalyzed on her own show, and maybe this interview needed to end. Jeannie stood abruptly. The audience gasped, some standing as if expecting a confrontation. Jeannie said Sherri was right. This interview needed to end. She said she came expecting an honest conversation, not a public therapy session she didn't sign up for. Sherri, still seated, told her to calm down and sit, to finish like an adult. The tone was dismissive and Jeannie's resolve hardened. She said that this exact dismissal, calling women dramatic when they express pain, was the problem. She was done shrinking herself for the sake of peace. Looking directly at the audience, she said what they were seeing wasn't a breakdown, but a breakthrough, her standing up for herself in real time. Sherri stood too, accusing Jeannie of performing for the cameras, making herself the victim for sympathy. She said this was her show, her space, and Jeannie was a guest. If Jeannie couldn't handle hard questions, maybe she wasn't as healed as she claimed. The production crew looked panicked, unsure whether to cut to commercial. The tension was now beyond control. Jeannie's voice stayed steady. She said there was a big difference between tough questions and judgments masked as concern. Sherri hadn't asked about her healing. She had told her she wasn't healing right. Sherri hadn't listened. She'd dismissed and replaced Jeannie's truth with her own. Sherri raised her hands, saying Jeannie was twisting everything, that she had always supported her through the divorce, defended her online, and reached out privately. She said Jeannie was turning her kindness into an attack. When had Jeannie become so defensive, so closed off to real friendship? Jeannie's eyes glistened, but she blinked back tears. Sherri, bringing up private conversations on camera, crossed a line. Those were supposed to be between friends, not public ammunition. She said maybe Sherri was never a real friend. Maybe she was just collecting emotional receipts to use later. That accusation hit hard. Sherri's tone softened, but it carried intensity. She said Jeannie was projecting her marriage trauma onto their friendship. Not everyone was out to get her. She said Jeannie's trust issues would drive everyone away if she didn't face them. Jeannie stepped back, shaking her head. She said pretending concern while gaslighting wasn't friendship. Manipulation wasn't care. Real friends didn't humiliate you and call it honesty. Everything happening proved why she had learned to guard herself. The studio was silent now. Even those recording on their phones could feel they were witnessing something irreversible. Sherri seemed to realize the cameras were still rolling and tried to regain composure. She said clearly both women had strong feelings and should discuss this privately. But Jeannie wasn't backing down. Sherri had made it public. She didn't get to hide now. She'd lit the fire. She couldn't act surprised it burned. Sherri's face fell. She said Jeannie was being cruel, that she was ruining their friendship for drama. She reached out her hand, asking Jeannie to stay, to show viewers that women could disagree and still reconcile. Jeannie looked at her hand, but didn't take it. She said maturity also meant knowing when to walk away, when something no longer felt healthy. She picked up her purse. Sherri's voice hardened. If Jeannie walked out now, she said, she was proving everything. Proving she couldn't handle tough conversations. Proving she ran when things got real. She said Jeannie called herself strong, but the first moment things got uncomfortable, she bolted. Jeannie stopped and turned, her voice calm and final. She said Sherri was confusing endurance with strength. Staying in harm wasn't bravery. It was self-destruction. There's a difference between quitting and choosing yourself, she said. What Sherri called running, Jeannie called self-preservation. Sherri shook her head, saying Jeannie had turned therapy language into excuses. Every disagreement was now toxic, every honest word labeled abuse. She said Jeannie had become too fragile to maintain real connections. Real friendship, she said, meant honesty, even when it hurt. Jeannie's tone rose, emotion cracking through. She said Sherri could reframe it however she wanted, but she had used her show to attack someone she claimed to care about. That wasn't love. It was control. Sherri had planned this, pushed this, and now she had her viral moment. A producer approached, suggesting a break, but both ignored him. Sherri's voice trembled. She said she had never meant to hurt Jeannie, that she genuinely cared and missed the old Jeannie, the one who could laugh, the one who trusted. Jeannie looked at her sharply. The old Jeannie, she said, was naive and desperate for approval. That Jeannie let others walk over her. This Jeannie had boundaries. If Sherri couldn't respect that, then maybe she missed the version she could manipulate. Growth, Jeannie said, isn't comfortable for people used to your silence. Tears filled Sherri's eyes. She said Jeannie was rewriting history, erasing years of friendship, ignoring all the support she'd given. She said one disagreement shouldn't erase everything, unless, of course, Jeannie wanted it to. She said if everyone in Jeannie's life was letting her down, maybe the common factor was Jeannie herself. Gasps spread through the audience. Even the crew froze. Jeannie stood still, then smiled. A tired, heartbroken smile. She said she appreciated Sherri finally showing her true colors. She said yes, she'd ended relationships that no longer served her, and she didn't regret it. Better to be alone than surrounded by people who disguised judgment as love. Sherri looked defeated, realizing this couldn't be salvaged. She quietly said she was sorry, that she valued Jeannie and never wanted it to end this way. But Jeannie didn't reply. She walked past her, past the cameras, past the stunned audience, head held high. Some people clapped softly, others just stared. Sherri stood frozen in place, silent for the first time. The cameras kept rolling, capturing the silence, the heartbreak, the end of something real. At the door, Jeannie paused just long enough to say one last thing. She hoped people watching would learn that it's okay to walk away. That piece is worth more than perception. That sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is refuse to participate in your own diminishment. Then she walked out. The studio erupted, some applauding, others whispering in disbelief. Sherri finally turned to the cameras, voice trembling, saying they'd need to cut to commercial, that real conversations are messy. But deep down, she knew. This wasn't just a messy talk show moment. It was a friendship ending live on air, and that's how two women, once allies, turned a simple interview into one of television's most unforgettable clashes. Now tell me, was Jeannie right to walk away? Or should she have stayed and tried to make peace with Sherri?